everybody, my name is Tanya and welcome to my February wrap up. So as I'm sure you'll remember from my February TBR video, I set myself quite a optimistic TBR for Fantasy February. I didn't get to everything that I wanted to, but I knew going in that that was going to happen. I had a really fantastic reading month. I actually completed 14 things for the month, but that includes 4 graphic novels and a short story. So the first thing I completed in February was something that I started in January. I was around halfway through, and that was the audiobook of Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. So this follows the character of David, and after David's father dies, he seeks out his uncle to gain his inheritance, and the uncle doesn't want to give up his money and his holdings, and organises for David to be kidnapped. And so he is taken on a ship and he's going to be sold into slavery, and adventure ensues. The next book I completed was also something that I started in January, and that was South of Darkness by John Marsden. This one is the story of 13-year-old Barnaby Fletch, who is a street urchin on the streets of London. He's having to scrounge and scavenge and pickpocket to survive. He's got very few friends and very little support, and he hears of a paradise that is Botany Bay, and he conspires to commit a crime so he can get transported there and live in this paradise, which, you know, just to start with, doesn't sound like the best of plans. So approximately the first half of this deals with Barnaby in London still. It's only kind of halfway through that we start getting to Australia and dealing with that element of it, and the early part of this was giving me a very, you know, Dickens vibe, and that was really bizarre because John Marsden is so removed from Dickens, it's not even a comparison. But I was getting very much Oliver Twist, kind of the Artful Dodger vibes from Barnaby and his lifestyle. So then Barnaby hears of Botany Bay from somebody who has returned. So Barnaby decides that this sounds like a better future for him than the one he's currently in, because he's in danger from a man who he has basically defrauded, not intentionally, but the man is demanding money back for an exchange that Barnaby made with him that turned out to be fake money, and he decides to take his chances on being transported to Australia. He decides he's going to commit a crime, and once that happens, he starts kind of realising that maybe this wasn't the best plan after all. So then we follow Barnaby to Australia on the very, very long voyage on a very cramped ship. And then we get to Australia and the hardships that befall Barnaby there when it comes to the work required of convicts at a penal colony. And all in all, I thoroughly enjoyed this. Really enjoyed it. Was really excited when I saw John Marsden put out a new book, and a new book for adults, but really enjoyed it and would highly recommend it. The next book that I finished I don't have with me because I had to return it to the library straight away, and that was Saga Volume 4. So this finally came in at the library, and naturally there was a queue behind me, so I read it straight away, got it back to the library. Fantastic, as always, wonderful edition. You've heard so many things about Saga. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and now we'll wait for the next volume. So during the month I was reading quite a few things simultaneously, and things crossing over with the, you know, audiobook that I started after Kidnapped and whatnot. But the next thing that I completed in the month was The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This one was the first thing that I completed for the Fantasy February challenge over at Booktube Reading Buddies, and of course this was for Year of Cosmere and my first Brandon Sanderson, and it was fantastic. This is written in a really easy style that's very easily engaging and is very well described. This has one of the most complex magic systems that I've read about, and should have been very confusing, or could have been very confusing, but the way that Brandon Sanderson describes it makes it, you're able to visualize it very easily. So I'm sure you've heard this by now, but the magic system in this one is to do with ingesting various metals, and then the metals in your stomach giving you access to various abilities. So this follows a fantastic group of wildly varying characters that come together to try and overthrow the rulers. Reign has been ruling for over 1,000 years, and their struggle to fight against an enemy that is seemingly invincible. Just epic. Really, just, I loved it. Next up, I read The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen Volume 1 by Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill. This is something that I've owned for a very long time, have been really intrigued with the concept of, but just hadn't got around to doing it. Now this is one that had been nominated for Fantasy February, didn't quite make the cut, but a few of us read it regardless. I went into this expecting to love it, and I didn't. The premise sounds fantastic. It takes a lot of characters from classic works of literature like Mina Murray from Dracula, and Quatermain from King Solomon's Mines, and Captain Nemo from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the Invisible Man from the Invisible Man, and brings them together to kind of fight crime, as you will. And that just sounds awesome, but the execution, not so much. The art itself I wasn't so impressed with either in some regards, and a lot of the racial stereotypes that are portrayed I think were rather insensitive. All in all, I was really disappointed with something that I've built up, and you know, that's partially my fault for building it up so high, but the concept I loved. The execution. The next book that I completed for the month, and the second one for Fantasy February, was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This one I did end up listening to on audio, which was fantastic, and I really enjoyed it. This one is definitely the opposite to the Final Empire in terms of style of fantasy. This one is one of the slower kind of fantasy, which doesn't bother me either. I'm happy to take something a bit more slow paced, and it's very character driven and focused instead of action, and so we spend a lot of time with Fitz. Fitz is the bastard son of the King in Waiting, and follows what happens when his grandfather says, no, we're not looking after you anymore, and leaves him at the castle saying, you take him. So this one was definitely a slow build and slower burn, but there are some sections that you really want to know what happens next, and I'm really intrigued to see where the series goes. What really interested me with the way that this one was finished off is it is kind of given a neat ending. There are still some outstanding conflicts that are happening, but in general there's a lot of statements like, we never spoke about this again, or, you know, this person's character changed because of this, and instead of leaving it to the next books to explore that, she's kind of tied that off, and that seems like a lot of restrictions to place on yourself if she knew at the time that this was continuing on. I'm so pleased to have finally read something by Robin Hobb. It's been something that has been sitting on my shelves for years, and I will definitely be continuing on with the series. I think I'm going to continue on with the audiobooks, and I'm really interested to see what's next for Fitz. Next up is another graphic novel, and I read Pretty Deadly Volume 1. This again was for the Fantasy February challenge, and I had put a hold on this at library to see whether it would come in, and it did, and I read it, and I really enjoyed it. I don't really know how to describe this, or how to really talk about the plot, because there's a lot of kind of build up and scene setting in this one that we're kind of thrown in the deep end and not really explained, so we're going through this trying to work out what's going on. Really enjoyed the kind of Wild West setting for this one. I thought that was something a bit different, and especially when we're talking a fantasy Vic, fantasy Wild West is, yep, I'm on board for that. And now that I've gotten to the end and I understand a lot more of what came beforehand, yeah, I'm definitely intrigued to see where the storyline goes next. Next up, and another book for Fantasy February, I finished The Colour of Magic by Terry Pratchett. This is the first book in his Discworld series, and is the first Terry Pratchett that I've ever read. This, I've heard from various sources, is not his best, and there isn't a lot to this one, and that is true. There is a storyline to this one, but there's not kind of a lot to hang on to in it. But I did really enjoy it for all that, and I'm intrigued to continue on and read more of the Discworld series and become more acquainted with the world. This follows the character of inept wizard Rincewind and the world's first tourist, Twoflower, and the adventures they go on when travelling around Discworld, and the trouble that they get into. It is a lot of fun, for all that there isn't all that much to it. Definitely quirky, and I like quirkiness in books, definitely like that kind of humour. My favourite part about this is the luggage. Now, Twoflower has a piece of luggage that will follow him wherever he goes, and he's very loyal. It has a whole bunch of little legs that it runs around after him on, and if people try and get too close and steal contents from the luggage, it will snap shut and, you know, take off arms. So I really enjoyed the luggage. You can see it, I don't know whether I can get it to focus, down the bottom here on its little legs running around. And so that made me chuckle. I think my favourite character was the luggage. An ongoing theme through this is Rincewind cheating death and death coming for him, and Rincewind getting out of it again and again, and the way that this ends, I'm definitely intrigued to see what happens next. Next up, I finished the 2 books for my school project for the year, so the books I read in year 8, so that is Dougie by James Maloney, and then Came Back to Show You I Could Fly by Robin Klein. I'm not going to talk too much about these because I will do a wrap-up video of these, but in brief, Dougie is the story of a young Aboriginal boy and racial tensions in small town Australia, and Came Back to Show You I Can Fly follows the story of 11-year-old Seymour and the friendship he strikes up with 20-year-old Angie, and the issues that Angie has. The next one I finished is something I'm not going to talk too much about either, but that was Bastard Out of Carolina by Dorothy Allison. This was my pick for the Booktube Recommends project this month. My recommendation from Mercedes from Mercedes Bookish Musings. Again, I'm going to do a separate video talking about this, but this was just amazing. I don't know whether loved it is an appropriate term for the storyline within this. If the single word that I used to describe Monkey Grip in my wrap up for last month was Australian, very Aussie, the single word for this one would be powerful. And it is. It's a really powerful story. I just am still struggling to find words, but there will be a video coming about this soon. It's just so good. So we're almost there. Now we come to the last day of the month. So I was able to complete 3 separate things on the last day of the month. Admittedly, all quite short, but I'm pretty impressed with myself. The first one was my Agatha Christie of the month, Evil Under the Sun. Now, I tend to remember the 31st of January reading my last Agatha Christie pick. Here we are on the last day of the month, and I read this month's pick. I definitely need to work on that. As I said in my TBR video, this is a reread for me and is one of my favourite Agatha Christie's. This is another of her Hercule Poirot novels, and this one takes place while Poirot is seemingly on holiday. He's having a relaxed holiday on a holiday resort on a small island off the coast of England, and of course crime and murder ensue, and Poirot is, you know, drawn out of his holiday to detect. It was a really interesting experience reading this one, knowing the storyline and knowing the whodunit, because I was able to pick up on a lot of the cues through it. Usually when I'm reading Agatha Christie, I'm completely blind, miss a lot of the cues, whereas this one, knowing it a bit better, I was able to pick up on a lot of clues in this one and see just where she was hinting, and so I enjoyed that experience. This is still one of my favourite Agathas and would highly recommend it, as always. Then, because I had pledged on the Booktube Reading Buddies group to read 5 books of the Fantasy February Challenge, and I was sitting on 4 books, I decided to read the short story that was in it, The Water That Falls on You From Nowhere by John Chu. This was only about 30 pages, so it didn't take me long at all, and meant that I could have that kind of, you know, self-satisfaction of seeing it tell me I'd completed the challenge, even if I hadn't got to the books that I had necessarily wanted to. I really enjoyed the short story, although it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. It's the story of a world where if you tell a lie, water falls on you from nowhere. So if you tell a small lie, you might get a little trickle of water, and if you tell a big lie, there'll be a torrential downpour. But that element wasn't really a big part of the story. The story was more focused on characters and relationships, and the story of a young Chinese man who's struggling with coming out to his family. So the water, you know, shows up a few times, and it plays a part in the character's inability to admit his emotions, and the water speaks for him as such, but I didn't really get a very big fantasy vibe from it, because it was very much dealing with the characters and with the conflicts that the characters were having. Definitely glad I read it though, not just to hit the 5 points for the challenge, but yeah, I'd like a story that's more about the water too. And then the final book that I read is something that wasn't on my TBR, is something that I've had out from the library way too long, really had to get to and to bring back, and that is Black Sad. So I first heard about Black Sad from Ronlit on her channel talking about Black Sad, and how she found Black Sad incredibly sexy, and you know, after hearing that, as if I wouldn't pick it up. So read this, really enjoyed it. Don't know whether I quite find Black Sad just as sexy as Ronnie does, but yeah, you know, I see the appeal. This is kind of a, you know, James Bond, Philip Marlowe noir character, kind of Black Sad's the detective investigating crime. Really enjoyable, really enjoyed it. The art is fantastic and would highly recommend it. So these are all the things that I was able to read in the month of February, plus Saga Volume 4 and the short story, The Water That Falls on You From Nowhere. So I'm incredibly happy with all that. And as always, if you've read any of these, let me know if you have any questions about any of them, but let me know what you think. And as always, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!